ministries have learned a lot over these last couple of years, but actually this has been a good opportunity for leaders to learn as well. In fact, we're mentioning learning. So let me ask, what have you learned as a leader through this last season?
I think for me, it has been that teachable spirit. I've talked about that for 20 plus years. But the temptation, the longer you're in a place, and being at Southview so long now, the temptation is to kind of settle into a rhythm and feel like you kind of know what's coming. You kind of know how to navigate around certain things. And even with the unexpected and the uncertainty that is inherent in dealing with people in church ministry, there is a sense where you can kind of settle into a predictable rhythm. And I think what the last couple of years has done in my own leadership is shaken me completely out of any kind of complacency or feeling like, hey, I think I can do this. Boy, I'm leaning into that teachability like I never have. I'm listening, I'm learning, I'm reading, because I want to honor God in how I lead. And I want to encourage our leaders to do the same. And they're gonna catch that more than they're just gonna listen to me talk about it.
Ty, tell me, you're kind of expressing how your leadership as a team evolved through these last couple of years. How about you personally? How has your leadership been shaped by what you've experienced the last couple of years? Anything come to mind?
Yeah. Well, I'm a lot more dialed into the voice of God than I've ever been before. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way. What I mean by that is I thought I had a great relationship with the Father, but 2020 really forced me to lean in and know exactly what he wanted me to do. At the same time, the staff had to do the very same thing. I couldn't be the guy who made decisions for everybody. People had to make decisions, sometimes on the fly. If we got it wrong, there was going to be grace. Okay. But I had so much confidence in the staff that even if they got it wrong, we could talk about it. It might get tense, but we were going to learn from it. And we were going to realize, what do we need to do? And so you had to trust people. You really did. And even if they had to work from home for a season, you had to trust them that they were doing what they needed to do to get their job done. One of the things that we did at the very beginning is we re-looked at each job description and what was being expected out of everyone. If it was unclear what was expected out of someone, there was room for us to get really bogged down. And so we had to go to each department and we had to reinvestigate if they knew what their job description was and how to do it. Those were some exciting things. For me, I had to look at my job description because I couldn't do everything. So I had to do what I was supposed to do.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, we've talked a lot about the ministry of the church in this season, but let's talk about your personal leadership. What leadership lessons have you learned in this season?
Engaging the Unstuck group was very intentional, and it kind of came in the middle of the pandemic. And I know too, there were, rightfully so, some in our team, whether at our deacon level or others, were just wondering, is this the right season to do this? But we really felt like it was the right season to lean in. And my son works in marketing, and he has a little term that they use in their company. They'll say that sometimes you can have some people in the business, but you need to not be in it. You need to be on it. And I've thought about that a lot with my own leadership, and even pastors and others that I've journeyed with. Sometimes we're so in it that we can't get on it. And that's why we marry our methodologies so much. We're so invested in the way we do things. And so when things like COVID comes, it's really hard to leverage us off of those methods and ways we've done things, because they have been so successful in the past. But when the game changes, the strategy needs to shift. But I think if anything, it's really caused me to really try to reposition myself on the ministry, not in the ministry. Now, I have things I have to do like everybody else. I have responsibilities, but I need those pause moments. In the Unstuck group, and this is not an infomercial for you, but man, honestly, it was true. You guys helped us kind of get our heads out of the weeds to get ourselves on the mission and the ministry so we could kind of forge a way forward. And that's certainly a valuable leadership lesson that I have through this. Often it was tweaking, and you're dealing with a lot of minutia that isn't working anymore. And unless you can get on top of it, you can't see what's next. You're just too close to it. And that's a big lesson, certainly through this pandemic, I've learned.
What has struck me about you, among a number of things, Pastor Greg, is that you're still learning, that you're still trying to figure out how do I take my next steps as a leader. So I'm curious, over these last couple of years in particular, what have you learned new about your leadership?
Good question. Well, I think I've learned I don't know as much as I think I know. You should have met me at 21. Brand new pastor, I knew everything. I had the answer to every question. I had a scripture, I was fast on the draw with all that. Well, I've learned that I don't know everything. I've learned that I have a lot to learn. But there are things you do pick up along the way. I had the privilege of getting to know Billy Graham very well. I wrote a book called Billy Graham, the Man I Knew. And when I first got to know Billy, I was in my late 30s. And I was starting to do my evangelistic crusades as he was sort of coming toward the end of his. And so he reached out to me and asked me to be in his board of directors, and then asked me to help him in the preparation of his messages, which to me was the greatest privilege of all time. But what fascinated me being around Billy is Billy was always a learner. I would be sitting with him and he would be asking me questions. And I'm thinking, why are you, the greatest evangelist of all time, asking my opinion, some guy in his 30s? What do I know? But Billy was always a learner, a lifelong learner. And I think that's very important. When I'm around other men of God, I'm always asking questions like, how do you do this? How do you do that? And I'll often reach out to my friends and say, what do you think about this? How would you approach this other thing? And I just feel there's always more to learn. And things are changing. Culture is changing. The problem with a lot of preachers is we're answering questions people are not asking, and sometimes we're not answering the ones they are asking. So we can become very easily disconnected from culture and end up in a little myopic world where we don't really interact with normal people. But anyway, your question was, what have I learned? I've learned that this is an unusual time. I've been doing this a long time. I've never heard of a time quite like this, where we're all collectively going through it together. That's another interesting thing. And so I talk a lot to my pastor friends, like, how are you handling in-person, meetings? How are you handling all these things? And so I'm constantly comparing notes and trying to do the best job I possibly can do. I don't want to live in the past. I don't want to rest on my laurels. I want to keep trying to break new ground and do new things. Coming back to pivoting, another thing we did in addition to our online ministry is we started making some movies. I made a movie called A Rush of Hope because I couldn't do a crusade one year. And we've been meeting at Angel Stadium for like 30 years. And for the first time, we can't do an in-person meeting because of restrictions. So we did an online cinematic crusade and ended up reaching more people. So I'm working on a new project now called Fame. The premise is basically so many people want to be rich and famous and think that will make them happy, but that's empty. And here's why. But it's going to be done in a beautiful cinematic way, but new ways to reach people. So I think, for folks that are listening, anybody can do online. You can literally do it with an iPhone and a Facebook page with a live feed.
That's right.
I think when the day is done, content is king. Deliver what people need and minister to people and play to your strengths, not your weaknesses. In other words, if you were a larger congregation and now you're a smaller congregation, stop running it like you're a big thing and run it like you're a small thing, because there's advantages to being a small thing. Like if I go into a room and there's 30 people there and seats, 150, I'll say, hey, let's all pull our seats closer together and I'll sit down and let's run this like a home Bible study. And I'll interact with the people I'm talking to because that's a fun way to communicate. But I think sometimes we're trying to do it like we always did it. And if you're smaller, celebrate the difference and embrace the smallness, because there's certain qualities in the small group you don't have in a larger group, right? So adapt to your situation.